I never thought the day would come when the threads of my life would unravel so violently. When the people I trusted most would twist those threads into a noose and leave me choking on betrayal. Even now, as I sit here trying to put these words into some kind of order, I feel the weight of disbelief pressing down on my chest. My name is Claire. I'm 34 years old, a woman who grew up in a small town where family was supposed to mean everything. I believed in loyalty. I believed in promises that couldn't be broken. I believed that blood and marriage were bonds strong enough to carry us through storms. But the truth is, those bonds can be shattered. And when they break, the shards cut deeper than anything you can imagine. I married young at 22, still wide-eyed, still clinging to the idea that love could fix everything. My husband, Michael, was steady, kind, someone who seemed to carry the calm of the world inside him. He had one brother, Daniel, older by 3 years, and from the very first family dinner I attended, I felt that his presence carried a kind of magnetic force. Daniel was charming, the kind of man who walked into a room and people bent toward him without realizing it. He was already married to Lily back then, and I remember how everyone praised them as the perfect couple, Daniel and Lily. High school sweethearts who survived college apart and built a life together after. I thought I admired them. I thought their marriage was what stability looked like. It was what I wanted mine to be. But life has a way of planting seeds in silence. Seeds you don't notice until they grow into monstrous vines that suffocate everything around you. The unraveling began on a gray Tuesday morning. The kind where the world already feels heavy before you even leave your bed. Michael had left early for work, and I decided to stop by the hospital on my way to run errands. An old family friend had been admitted after surgery, and I wanted to check in. Hospitals always make me uneasy, the sterile smell, the echo of footsteps in long hallways, the faint groans of patients behind closed doors. But that day, something pulled me there. Call it instinct, call it fate. As I walked past the nurse's station, I caught sight of a familiar figure through the glass of a recovery room. Daniel, my brother-in-law. My pulse quickened, but my first thought was concern. Was someone hurt? Had something happened to him or Lily? But then I saw the way he leaned over the bed, his hand brushing the hair from the face of the woman lying there. She wasn't Lily. Her name, I would later learn, was Marissa. At that moment, though, she was just a stranger who reached up and clasped Daniel's hand with the kind of intimacy that doesn't lie. Their eyes locked in a way that made my stomach twist, as though I had intruded on something I was never meant to see. My instinct was to step back, to turn around and pretend I hadn't witnessed it. But I froze, glued to the hallway floor, as if the truth had nailed me there. I don't know how long I stood there. But eventually, Daniel glanced up. His eyes widened, and for a brief second, fear flashed across his face. Then it was gone, replaced by a practiced smile, the kind that could cover 1,000 sins. He excused himself from the room and met me in the hall, blocking my view of the woman inside. "Claire," he said, too casually, as if we'd simply run into each other at the grocery store. "What are you doing here?" My throat tightened. "I could ask you the same." He laughed, a nervous, forced sound, and said the woman was just a friend, someone from work he was helping out. I wanted to believe him. God, I wanted to. But the way his hand had lingered in hers, the way his eyes softened when he looked at her, it wasn't friendship. It was something else, something raw, something dangerous. I left the hospital that day with a storm in my chest. Every step to my car felt heavier, like I was carrying a secret too big for my body to hold. Part of me screamed to tell Michael immediately, to unburden myself and let him carry the weight with me. But another part of me, the quieter, more insidious part, hesitated. If I told him, it would break something. Not just between him and Daniel, but between all of us. Families are like houses. You pull out one rotten beam, and the whole structure starts to collapse. So I kept quiet for a while, but silence is its own kind of poison. It eats at you, whispers in your ear when the lights go out. I began to notice things I'd overlooked before. Daniel's sudden late nights at work, Lily's tired smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. The way my husband, oblivious as ever, kept defending his brother whenever someone questioned him. And each time I saw them all together at Sunday dinners, birthdays, holidays, I felt like I was watching actors in a play, everyone pretending the lines they'd rehearsed were real. I wish I could say I confronted him right away. I wish I could say I had the courage, but fear kept me pinned down. Fear of what it would do to my marriage. Fear of being the one who destroyed the illusion of family. Until one night, the fear was ripped out of me by something worse. It was Lily's voice on the phone, trembling, breaking. She had found messages on Daniel's phone, not just casual texts, but entire threads of devotion and promises. And the name Marissa was repeated over and over. She didn't know I had seen them together at the hospital weeks earlier. She didn't know I had been carrying this truth in my chest like a stone. When I drove to her house that night, she was a wreck, pacing the living room, clutching her phone like it was a weapon. "I thought it was me," she said, tears streaking down her face. "I thought I wasn't enough for him anymore. But it's her. Claire. It's always been her." That was the night I broke my silence. I told her about the hospital, about the way he looked at Marissa, about the smile he tried to use to convince me everything was fine. Lily's sobs turned into something harsher than anger. Fury. The sound of a woman who had been lied to for too long. I thought that would be the end of it, that Lily would confront him, and maybe there would be shouting, maybe there would be tears, but at least the truth would be out. But betrayal has a way of spreading, like fire jumping from one rooftop to another. Once it starts, you can't control where it burns. Because Daniel wasn't the only one hiding something. It started with whispers from people in town, little fragments that didn't make sense until they did. Someone mentioned seeing my husband, Michael, outside a bar late at night. Someone else said they thought he looked too familiar with one of his coworkers. I brushed it off, told myself people love to gossip, especially about men like him who seemed too good to be true. But the more I tried to ignore it, the louder the whispers became. And then I found the receipts. They were tucked in the pocket of his jacket, as though he hadn't even bothered to hide them well. Hotel charges, dinner bills for two, dates that didn't line up with the nights he claimed to be working late. My hands shook so badly I could barely hold the papers, my breath coming in short gasps as though the walls were closing in. The betrayal I thought I had witnessed in Daniel's life wasn't confined to him. It had seeped into mine as well, poisoning everything I thought I could trust. I confronted Michael that night. My voice was trembling, my heart pounding, but I laid the receipts on the table like evidence in a trial. For a moment, He stared at them in silence, his face pale, his jaw tight. Then he looked at me with eyes I didn't recognize, cold and defensive. "It's not what you think," he said. But it was exactly what I thought. I wish I could tell you that I left him right then, that I packed a bag and walked out the door with my dignity intact. But the truth is, I didn't. Not yet. Because betrayal doesn't just break your trust. It breaks your sense of self. It makes you question everything, including whether you're strong enough to survive without the life you've built, even if that life has turned into a lie. For weeks, I lived in a haze, my body going through the motions while my mind spiraled. I couldn't look at Michael without seeing those receipts. I couldn't sit across from Daniel and Lily at dinner without choking on the secret we shared. The walls of our family, once so solid, now felt like glass, fragile and ready to shatter at the slightest touch. And then came the night that changed everything. It was late, nearly midnight, when my phone buzzed, a number I didn't recognize. I almost ignored it, but something in me made me pick up. A woman's voice, tired and raw. "Is this Claire?" she asked. "Yes." "This is Marissa." My heart stopped. Her name pierced through me like a shard of glass. For weeks, I had whispered it in my head, heard it slip from Daniel's lips in fragments I wasn't meant to hear. And now she was here, not in shadows, not behind hospital doors, but in my ear, her voice trembling with something that was neither guilt nor pride, something far more complicated. "I didn't know who else to call," she said after a long pause. "But I think you deserve to know the truth." I sat frozen on the edge of my bed, the moonlight spilling across the room like an unwelcome witness. My husband stirred beside me, oblivious, his breath deep and even. The irony almost made me laugh, a bitter, broken laugh that never quite made it past my lips. "What truth?" I asked, though part of me already knew. She exhaled, a sound so heavy it seemed to carry years of secrets. "Daniel told me. You saw us at the hospital. He said you'd keep quiet, but I can't anymore. I can't live in the shadows of your family's lies." My pulse raced. Lies. "That man you're married to, Michael, he's not the saint you think he is. He's been with me, too." The words shattered the thin thread I had been clinging to. I couldn't breathe. For a moment, I thought I might collapse right there on the carpet. "You're lying," I whispered, though I could hear the truth in her voice. "I wish I were," she said softly. "But he's been coming to see me for months. Sometimes, when Daniel couldn't, sometimes on his own. He tells me things, ugly things, about all of you. He said you'd never believe me, but here I am, begging you to open your eyes." The phone trembled in my hand. My world, already cracked, was splintering into pieces I could never glue back together. I wanted to scream at her, to call her a manipulator, a liar, anything that would protect me from the reality pressing in. But deep down, I knew she was telling the truth. Those receipts, the whispers, the look in Michael's eyes when I confronted him. It all made sense now. A puzzle I hadn't wanted to finish. I hung up before she could say more. My hands shook so violently that the phone slipped onto the floor. Michael stirred again, rolling over, his arm brushing against me. I recoiled as if his touch were fire. That night, I lay awake until the sun rose, staring at the ceiling, feeling like my body was just a shell. Inside me, something was dying, but something else, something darker was being born. Rage, not just at Michael, not just at Daniel, but at the entire fragile house of lies that had been built around me. I had given my heart, my loyalty, my trust, and they had tossed it aside like trash. The days that followed were a blur. I couldn't look at Michael without seeing the shadow of Marissa in his arms. I couldn't face Daniel without hearing the echo of his promises to her. And poor Lily Sweet. Trusting Lily, I couldn't even bring myself to tell her the whole truth. It would have destroyed her. But the truth has a way of clawing its way to the surface. No matter how hard you try to bury it. It was a Sunday dinner, the kind we always had at Daniel and Lily's house. The table was set with roast chicken, potatoes, laughter that felt rehearsed. Lily smiled, though her eyes were rimmed with exhaustion. Daniel poured wine like nothing was wrong. And Michael, sitting beside me, played his role flawlessly, his hand occasionally brushing mine in mock affection. But I couldn't play along anymore. The words boiled inside me, too heavy to contain. Halfway through the meal, I set my fork down and said quietly, "I need to tell you something." The room stilled. All eyes turned to me. My heart pounded like a drum in my chest. "I saw Daniel at the hospital," I said, my voice trembling, "with Marissa, and I know she's not just his. She's been with Michael too." The silence that followed was unbearable. For a moment, no one breathed. Lily's face went pale, her fork clattering against her plate. Daniel's glass froze halfway to his lips, his eyes narrowing into something sharp, dangerous, and Michael didn't even flinch. He just leaned back in his chair, his expression cold, almost smug, as though he had been waiting for this moment. "You don't know what you're talking about," Daniel finally said, his voice low, taut with fury. But Lily's sob cut through his denial. She pushed back from the table, tears spilling down her cheeks, shaking her head in disbelief. "You told me it was just a mistake," she cried. "You told me it was over." Daniel's jaw clenched, his mask cracking. But before he could answer, Michael finally spoke. His voice was calm, almost casual. "She's not lying." The words sliced through me like a blade. I hadn't expected him to admit it, not like this. Not so easily. But there he was, his confession laid bare, as if the truth meant nothing at all. Lily's scream shattered the room. She lunged at him, at Daniel, pounding her fists against his chest until he grabbed her wrists. "You bastard," she cried. "You ruined everything." I sat frozen, unable to move, unable to breathe. This was it. The collapse. The house of lies crumbling brick by brick. The rest of the night was chaos. Lily locked herself in the bedroom, her sobs echoing through the walls. Daniel stormed out, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. Michael drove home in silence, his knuckles white on the steering wheel, his jaw set like stone, and I sat beside him, feeling like a ghost in my own life. The next morning, I woke to an empty bed. Michael was gone. His clothes, his belongings, half of them missing. On the kitchen table lay a single note, scrawled in his rushed handwriting. "I can't do this anymore. Don't look for me." I stared at the note until the words blurred through my tears. After all the betrayal, all the lies, he still got to leave on his own terms. He still got to run away, leaving me with the wreckage. But if he thought that was the end, he was wrong. In the weeks that followed, I discovered more bank accounts I didn't know about, debts in my name, secrets stacked on secrets. Michael hadn't just betrayed me emotionally, he had betrayed me financially, legally, in ways that left me gasping for air. And Daniel had disappeared into Marissa's arms, leaving Lily broken, clinging to the ashes of the life she thought she had. It should have destroyed me. Maybe it did, for a while. I lost weight. I lost sleep. I lost the ability to trust my own reflection in the mirror. But beneath the wreckage, something stronger began to take root. A resolve. A promise I made to myself as I lay awake night after night. They will pay. Not with violence. Not with screaming matches or broken dishes. No. That would be too easy. They needed to feel what I felt. To taste the slow, searing burn of betrayal turned inward. To watch the ground crumble beneath their feet the way it had beneath mine. I began to plan, quietly, carefully, like a spider weaving its web. I gathered evidence, bank statements, text messages, photographs. I visited lawyers, accountants, anyone who could help me untangle the mess Michael had left behind. And I started to watch Daniel and Marissa, learning their patterns, their weaknesses, their blind spots. I became invisible, the grieving wife, the heartbroken sister-in-law. They thought I was finished, but in reality, I was sharpening my claws in the dark. Because betrayal may break you, but sometimes it forges you into something unrecognizable, something stronger, something dangerous. And I was ready. There's a particular kind of silence that settles over you after devastation, a silence that isn't peace, but rather the breathless pause before the storm. I lived in that silence for months. To everyone else, I was a woman learning to move on. I smiled when I had to, showed up at family gatherings with hollow eyes, and pretended the ache inside me was just grief, not fury. People pitied me. They whispered about how strong I was, how gracefully I was handling the collapse of my marriage. If only they knew. Inside, I was a furnace. Every smile was a mask, every step a calculated move. I wasn't healing. I was hunting. Michael had vanished like a coward, but the trail of destruction he left me was impossible to ignore. Creditors called day and night. Our house, my house, the one I had poured years of work into, was nearly pulled out from under me because of debts he had forged in my name. I learned that he had siphoned money from our joint accounts long before he left, building a life of shadows with Marissa, sometimes with Daniel's help, sometimes not. The betrayal was multi-layered, complex, like a knot I couldn't untangle. But instead of breaking me, it clarified my purpose. They thought they had stripped me bare, left me powerless, but they underestimated the resilience of a woman who has nothing left to lose. I started with Daniel. He was easier to reach, still parading Marissa around town, oblivious to how much the community whispered behind their backs. I became friendly with the right people, the clerk at City Hall, the neighbor who loved to gossip, the nurse who had seen Daniel sneaking into Marissa's hospital room at odd hours. Piece by piece, I stitched together a tapestry of their sins. I didn't confront him directly. No, that would have been too merciful. Instead, I fed the truth into the cracks of his life, where it could fester. I sent Lily anonymous messages, screenshots of texts, photos of Daniel's car parked outside Marissa's apartment. She tried to ignore them at first, tried to cling to the shredded remnants of loyalty, but soon the weight of proof crushed her denial. She filed for divorce, and Daniel, arrogant as ever, thought he could charm his way out of it. He couldn't. She had lawyers. She had evidence. She had me. Watching him unravel was almost intoxicating. I saw him at the grocery store one afternoon, his once proud shoulders hunched, his face pale. He spotted me near the produce aisle and froze. For a moment, I thought he might say something, plead, perhaps, or curse me. But he only lowered his gaze and slunk away like a dog caught stealing scraps. That was the moment I knew I had power. But my thirst wasn't quenched, because there was still Michael. Tracking him down wasn't easy. He had taken to drifting new addresses, new jobs, never settling too long in one place. But money leaves a trail, and I followed it like breadcrumbs. Eventually, I found him in another city, living with Marissa in a modest apartment. It sickened me to think of them playing house together, as though they hadn't reduced my life to rubble. I didn't storm in. I didn't scream at him in the street, though every bone in my body ached to. Instead, I watched. I learned. He had debts here too, gambling, mostly. He was reckless, spiraling. Marissa looked weary. Her once bright glow dimmed under the weight of his chaos. It almost made me pity her. Almost. What broke me wasn't seeing them together. It was seeing how easily he slipped into a new life, as though I had never existed, as though years of marriage could be erased like chalk on a sidewalk. That erasure was the deepest wound, and it was the one I intended to make him feel. I contacted his creditors. I let them know where he was. I leaked information to his boss about his gambling, his lies. One by one, the dominoes fell. He lost his job. His debts caught up with him. Landlords refused to rent to him. Marissa, once his co-conspirator, became his burden. And I heard through the grapevine that she left him after one final, explosive fight. Still, it wasn't enough. Watching him fall wasn't the same as making him know what he had done to me. So, I wrote him a letter. Not an angry tirade, not a plea for closure, a cold, precise account of everything I knew, everything I had orchestrated. I told him I had been the ghost in his shadow, the reason his life crumbled piece by piece. And at the end, I wrote, "Now you know what it feels like to have everything stolen from you. This is the last gift I'll ever give you." I didn't sign my name. I didn't need to. After that, I heard little of him. Some said he left the state, chasing yet another illusion of starting over. Others claimed he was still here, drifting between couches, a shell of the man he once pretended to be. I didn't care. For me, he was already gone. But the damage lingered in ways I hadn't anticipated. Nights were the worst when the quiet pressed in and memories clawed their way back. Sometimes I dreamed of our early days, when I believed he loved me, when Daniel and Lily were still whole, when Sunday dinners weren't dripping with poison. Waking from those dreams was like morning all over again. And yet, slowly, another feeling began to creep in. Not forgiveness, never that, but something quieter. A recognition that revenge, though intoxicating, doesn't rebuild the ruins. It only clears the ground. One evening, I visited Lily. She was sitting on the porch with a cup of tea, her hair pulled back, her face tired but calmer than I'd seen it in months. We didn't talk much at first. We just sat there, listening to the crickets hum in the dark. Then she turned to me and said softly, "We survived them." Claire, I hadn't thought of it that way. Survival felt too small a word for what we'd endured. But maybe survival was its own kind of victory. Maybe survival was the quiet revenge that no one could take away. Still, I couldn't shake the sense that the story wasn't finished. There were still secrets buried in the rubble of our family, things I hadn't uncovered yet, and part of me, the part that had grown sharp, wary, relentless, knew that one day those secrets would claw their way into the light. Because betrayal never ends where you think it does. It lingers, it festers, it waits, and I had learned, painfully, that the people closest to you are often the ones who sharpen the knife. I thought the storm had passed. I thought I had reached the quiet after the chaos. The moment where wounds scar over and life begins to feel like something you can hold in your hands again. But I was wrong. Life doesn't tie things up so neatly. The truth has a way of circling back. And betrayal. Betrayal is a ghost that doesn't stay buried. It started with a letter. Not the kind Michael had left me when he vanished, but one far older, tucked in the bottom of a dusty cedar chest in Lily's attic. She had asked me to help her clean out some boxes left from Daniel's hurried departure, and as I lifted stacks of papers and old photographs, the envelope slid into view. Yellowed edges, handwriting I didn't recognize, sealed but fragile with age. Lily noticed my hesitation. "What is it?" she asked, her voice wary, as though we both already knew this was something meant to change everything. I opened it carefully, the paper nearly crumbling in my hands, and what I read inside made my blood run cold. It was a letter from Daniel and Michael's father, written years before his death, addressed to their mother. But the words revealed a truth I had never imagined. Michael wasn't his son. He was the product of an affair. I stared at the words, rereading them as if repetition could alter their meaning. Michael had grown up believing he was Daniel's brother, carrying that name, that bloodline, that entitlement, and all along, he had been living a lie, a shadow woven into the family fabric. Lily covered her mouth, her eyes wide with horror. "They never told him," she whispered. I felt the weight of it sink into my bones. It explained so much: Michael's restlessness, his bitterness, the way he always seemed to be reaching for something just out of grasp. But it didn't excuse him. Nothing ever could. Still, the knowledge twisted inside me. I had destroyed him. Yes, but hadn't life begun that destruction long before me? Hadn't the truth been a rot beneath the floorboards of his entire existence? I wanted to burn the letter, to erase it, to let the secret die with the man who wrote it. But another part of me, the part that had been reshaped by betrayal, knew it was dangerous to keep it hidden. Secrets breed monsters, and I wasn't going to let another one grow in the dark. I kept the letter for months. I carried it with me, folded in my wallet like a silent burden. Sometimes I imagined tracking Michael down, thrusting it into his hands, watching his face crumble under the weight of it. Other times, I wondered if I should give it to Daniel, force him to confront the lies his family had been built upon. But in the end, I did neither. I simply held on to it, waiting for the day when the truth would demand to be spoken. That day came sooner than I expected. It was Lily who called me. Her voice shook on the phone. "He's back," she said. My stomach dropped. "Who?" "Michael. He showed up at Daniel's old house. He's been asking questions. About us. About you." The room tilted around me. After everything, after disappearing into the void, he was back. And if he was asking about me, then the letter I carried burned even hotter in my pocket. I met him 2 nights later. Not by choice, but because he found me. I came home from work to find him sitting on my porch, thinner than I remembered, his once sharp features dulled by exhaustion and bitterness. His eyes, though his eyes were alive, lit with the kind of fire that comes from a man who has nothing left to lose. "Claire," he said, his voice raw, cracked. "We need to talk." I stood frozen at the bottom of the steps, every instinct screaming at me to run. But I didn't. I climbed the steps slowly, my heart pounding, the letter in my wallet like a live wire. "What could you possibly have to say to me?" I asked, my voice sharper than I felt. He looked at me with something between desperation and rage. "I know it was you," he said. "All of it. The creditors, the job, Marissa leaving. You ruined me." I didn't flinch. "You ruined yourself." For a long moment, we stared at each other, the air heavy with everything left unsaid. Then his shoulders sagged and his voice softened. "Maybe I did, but you don't know the whole story." And that's when I knew. That was the moment the letter's truth pressed itself against my ribs. He didn't know. He had lived his whole life blind to it. I could have told him then. I could have handed him the letter and watched the final piece of his world collapse. But I didn't. Not that night, because in his broken eyes, I saw something I hadn't expected, something that shook me more than his betrayal ever had. I saw the boy he must have been, the boy who grew up chasing his brother's shadow, desperate to belong, desperate to be loved, the boy who had been lied to before he ever learned how to lie himself. It was almost enough to soften me. Almost. But then I remembered Marissa's trembling voice on the phone, Lily's sobs in her bedroom, my own sleepless nights staring at the ceiling while the weight of his lies pressed down on me. And the softness turned back to steel. "You want the whole story," I whispered. "Be careful what you ask for." I didn't tell him that night. I let him stew in the not knowing. Let the silence gnaw at him the way betrayal had gnawed at me. I wanted him to feel the hunger of unanswered questions. The same hunger that had devoured me for months, but deep inside, I knew the moment was coming. One day soon, I would place that letter in his hands. And when I did, it would be the final blow, the one betrayal he couldn't run from, the one truth that would strip him bare. And maybe then, finally, I would be free. The night I finally gave Michael the letter was one I'll never forget. The air was thick, summer heat pressing down like a weight, cicadas screaming from the trees as if they knew what was about to happen. He had been haunting the edges of my life for weeks, showing up in places he didn't belong, circling like a wounded animal that hadn't decided whether to lash out or collapse. I was tired of it, tired of looking over my shoulder, tired of holding a secret that wasn't mine to carry. I called him. My voice was steady, though my hands trembled around the phone. "Meet me," I said, "at the old park." Tonight. He was already there when I arrived, sitting on the bench where we used to take walks in the early days of our marriage. For a moment, the sight of him sitting there almost broke me. Once, I had loved this man with a kind of blind devotion that makes you reckless. And now, here he was, hollow-eyed, broken, waiting for me like the ghost of that love. I sat down across from him, leaving space between us, the folded letter clutched in my hand. He noticed it immediately. His eyes flicked to it, then back to me, suspicion narrowing his gaze. "What's that?" he asked. "The truth," I said. He gave a bitter laugh. "I think we've had enough of that between us." "No," I whispered. "You've had nothing but lies. From me, from Daniel, from your family." But this, I held the letter out toward him, my arm shaking. "This is the lie that started it all." He hesitated before taking it. His fingers brushed mine briefly once. That touch had meant safety. Now it felt like fire. He unfolded the paper slowly, carefully, as though the weight of it might crush him if he moved too quickly. And then his eyes moved across the words. At first, there was nothing, just silence. His lips moved, soundless, reading again and again. And then, like a dam breaking, his breath hitched. His chest rose and fell in ragged gasps. His hands shook so violently the paper nearly tore. "No," he muttered. "No. This can't be." "It is," I said quietly. His eyes lifted to mine then, wild and furious. "Why would you give me this? Because you needed to know? Because you've been living a lie your entire life? And lies are poison. Look what they did to us. Look what they made of you." He let out a strangled sound, somewhere between a laugh and a sob. He crumpled the letter in his fist, pressed it against his forehead like he could force the words back into the page. "All those years," he whispered. "I wasn't even his son. I wasn't even," he broke off, unable to finish. I should have felt triumph. This was the final blow I had promised myself, the truth that would strip him bare. And yet, sitting there, watching him unravel, I felt something unexpected, something that shook me more than rage ever had. Pity for all the things he had done to me, for all the nights he had left me hollow and shaking with betrayal. In that moment, I saw not the monster, not the betrayer, but the broken man who had been betrayed first, long before me. And that realization was the cruelest twist of all. He looked at me then, eyes red, voice hoarse. "What am I supposed to do with this, Claire? What am I supposed to be now?" I swallowed hard, my own tears blurring the world. "That's not for me to answer. You took everything from me. You shattered me. But this is your reckoning, your choice. You can let it destroy you, or you can finally face who you are without the lies." We sat there for a long time in silence, the cicadas screaming, the air heavy with everything we'd lost. Finally, he stood, clutching the letter like a lifeline, and walked away. He didn't look back. That was the last time I saw him. Word drifted through the months that followed rumors of him leaving town again. Whispers of breakdowns, of new beginnings that never lasted. I didn't chase them. I didn't need to. He was no longer mine to carry. As for me, life didn't magically heal. Betrayal leaves scars you can't see, scars that itch in the quiet hours. There are still nights I wake up with the weight of it pressing on my chest, memories clawing their way back into my dreams. But there is also light now, faint but real. Lily and I became each other's lifeline. Two women burned by the same fire, holding each other up through the smoke. We learned how to laugh again, even if sometimes that laughter was tinged with sorrow. We rebuilt, brick by brick, not the lives we had lost, but new ones stronger, quieter, born from survival. And I realized something I had never expected. Revenge hadn't freed me. It had sustained me long enough to survive. Yes, but it wasn't the fire of revenge that gave me life again. It was truth. Brutal, ugly, devastating truth. The kind that tears everything down but leaves room to build something honest in its place. So this is what I've learned. Family can be the sharpest knife. Betrayal, the deepest wound. But truth is the only thing that cuts clean. If you've walked with me through this story, if you've felt even a fraction of my pain, then I ask you this: hold on to the truth in your own life. No matter how heavy it feels, lies will always destroy. But truth, even when it burns, is the only thing that can set you free. If this story touched you, if you felt the weight of it in your heart, I hope you'll share it with someone who needs to hear they're not alone. Like this video, subscribe for more stories that cut to the bone, and leave me a comment. Tell me if you've ever carried a secret that nearly broke you. Your words matter more than you know.